Good afternoon. Welcome back to Lest We Forget Historical with your host, Lillian Cauldwell. And for the next several weeks, or Fridays, we are going to be discussing scams. And there are all sorts of scams, not just the romance scams, but there's also political scams. And that's what we're going to start out today's first episode on political scams. Welcome back to Passionate World Talk Radio Network. Educate, enlighten, and entertain. And as previously mentioned, we're doing a series on the different types of scams that are plaguing not only the United States, but all over the world. And to bring you resources and tips and additional information of how you can spot one or at least notice the red flags. Now, I am a person who's been scammed twice. The last one almost took away my freedom. And I am developing and will soon present a new podcast called ScamDamNation, talking about my journey about being scammed twice. But the worst part about it, not recognizing the red flags that are associated with it. And I learned all types of interesting things. So stay tuned for ScamDamNation beginning the 1st of June. And now on to the program. Did you know a survey was taken that revealed that more than half of the Americans have experienced political scams, even though most people don't really understand how these political scams work. The Scams and Disinformation Survey Report from Morlack, a cybersecurity division of McPaul, gathered the responses from across the United States to highlight the patterns of fraud and misinformation. It seems right with the upcoming presidential election and the disinformation that is malicious, use of deepfakes, and the power now, of course, of artificial intelligence. And they're all predicting that AI will probably play a significant part in the election this year, along with the wrong information. They give examples from fake Joe Biden robocalls to Russian and Chinese digital campaigns that aim to interfere with the elections. The cybersecurity industry and the government are on high alert when it comes to raising awareness among the U.S. voters. So in order for an American citizen to tell the difference between fact and fiction, and how these malicious widespread content is, researchers found that approximately 7 out of 10 Americans have experienced some type of scam in the past year, and more than half, 52%, encountered a political scam during the same period. 64% of survey participants admitted they had never heard about scams with deep fakes of politicians, and they weren't sure how they worked. Yet most expressed a high confidence in identifying fakes and disinformation. Really? Wow, I have trouble with that. Such a perception can pose substantial risks due to a potentially false sense of security, said Mullock in the report, adding that individuals everywhere need to be prepared to counter digital threats. Apparently, young Americans are more susceptible to the scams, especially while on social media and dating platforms. Although a majority of people do not engage with scammers, 1 in 4 still interacts with them and has to deal with the negative outcomes. In 40% of the encounters, scammers use phone calls to reach out to potential victims. Voice cloning is gaining momentum. Email is still the preferred medium for criminals, though. Meta, the owner of Facebook, recently announced major changes to its policies on digitally creative and altered media. So be forewarned. So when did all this political scamming started? Well, the most recent, they cited Watergate with President Nixon. And it made headlines, and it eventually brought down Richard Nixon from office. Richard Nixon and his administration engaged in questionable activities to ensure his re-election in 1972. Does that remind you of somebody? He who should not be named. Thank you, Ms. Rawlings, for that. When these activities came to light, mostly through the reporting of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, the administration then engaged in a cover-up at the highest level, sort of like your teenager blustering their way why they came home drunk or got a ticket for speeding. Facing the possibility of impeachment, Richard Nixon resigned from office in August 1974. Interesting, isn't it? Gary Hart is another example. A Democratic senator from Colorado was as close to a lock for the nomination and likely the presidency as any challenger in 1988 election, wrote Matt Bai, who profiled Hart's fall from grace in a recent book. But everyone was suspicious of Hart's marital infidelity, and an investigation by the Miami Herald led to the media frenzy, and Hart withdrew from the race. A few months later, he re-entered the campaign to let the people decide. And after 3 months, he quit again. The Eagleton affair. Sales to support, the Negro-Contras, a rebel group attempting to overthrow the communist Sandinista government in that country. Those transactions violated both American policy, and Perenna says, don't negotiate with hostage takers, don't pay ransoms, unquote. And yet they're paying ransom to people who hack into the really large organizations and companies' computers, and the CEOs are paying money to get their information back. An investigation by the Attorney General led to the removal of the National Security Counsel John Poindexter and Oliver North, and intense congressional hearings. While former President Reagan's role is unclear, he told the nation in a televised address from the Oval Office that the buck stops with him. I am the one who's ultimately accountable to the American people. Then we have Jack Abramoff, gifts for favors. And this is how the scam was described, involving a former lobbyist, Jack Abramoff, who was known as the man who bought Washington. He had a massive web of political corruption, which involved his clients, millions of dollars, free meals, tickets, trips to famous golf courses, and members of Congress. The Washington Post did an investigation, which led to an inquiry by the Justice Department. Abramoff and others, including the then chair of the powerful House Administrative Committee, went to prison. After Abramoff left prison, he wrote a book about the scandal and made his money back. Scam does pay. Tom DeLay, one of the lawmakers caught in the Abramoff web, was former House Majority Leader Tom DeLay. Indictments over alleged money laundering combined with his side to the Abramoff scandal led DeLay to leave Congress in 2005. Grand juries alleged that a PAC set up by DeLay skirted Texas campaign finance laws in an effort to elect state legislatures who would vote for redistricting legislation supported by delay. And the jury convicted him from Texas in 2010, from September 1973, that he will not resign if indicted. Agnew resigned in October in exchange for a plea bargain that kept him out of jail. Nixon appointed House Minority Leader Gerald Ford as Agnew's replacement, and we all know what Gerald Ford did. He became president of the United States after serving as VP. Yes. Fannie Fox and Wilbur Mills. Mix was a striptease dancer. I guess like Stormy Daniels. Yes. And a powerful member of Congress, and you get the makings of a political sex scandal. Representative Wilbur Mills, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, was found drunk in a car at the tidal basin in October of 1974. In the car, too, was Annabelle Battisella, a stripper who went by the stage name Fannie Fox. After visiting Fox during one of her stage performances later that year, members of Congress pressured Mills to leave his post as Ways and Means chairman. He left Congress in 1976. How about John Edwards? He was a charismatic senator from North Carolina and a rising star in the Democratic Party after running on John Kerry's presidential ticket in 2004. During his presidential run 4 years later, Edwards faced tabloid allegations of an extramarital affair with Rielle Hunter, a filmmaker hired to work on his campaign. He admitted later that the allegations were true, and he also fathered a child with her. 3 years later, Edwards faced a federal grand jury on charges of using campaign money to hide his affair. He was acquitted on one count and received a mistrial on the others. Lucky him. Two more potential political scams: Scooter Libby and Valerie Plan Wilson. After former Ambassador Joe Wilson published a 2003 op-ed questioning the Bush administration's decision to go to war in Iraq, his wife, in her role as an undercover CIA spy, was exposed in a newspaper column. Did the Bush White House know about this? Hard to say, because people can fashion truth any which way they want. David Petraeus, he's a 4-star general and the former commander of the U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And nearly a year into his new job as a CIA director, the FBI investigated him. They wanted to know if he shared any classified materials over the course of his extramarital affair with his biographer. Of course, he denied the charge, but the affair cost him his job in 2012. And during the course of this investigation, authorities found classified information at Petraeus' home. Last year, he pled guilty in 2015 to mishandling classified materials. And then in 2016, on the campaign trail, the Democratic frontrunner for president, Hillary Clinton, faced questions about her handling of government information on a private email server while she was Secretary of State. We will continue next week on the political scams that our nation seems to really relish doing and also seems not to learn very much from. So until next week, stay tuned. Thank you very much for listening. You can catch this podcast all over again at youtube.com/PW Network, Passionate World Radio Network, _ PW Talk Radio. Also at www.passionateworldtalkradio.com, and all of our social media and podcasting platforms. Thank you very much for joining. And this podcast is being sponsored by the Podcast Obstacle Training Course, where people, when they sign up for the course over at educate.passionworldtalkradio.com, will get a comprehensive, interactive 101, although we advise having a partner to work with, because podcasting is beyond speaking into a microphone. And you receive the ability and the opportunity to create 3 full podcasts, 15 minutes or less, 3 individual weeks where you will broadcast your podcast to PWTRN's global audience of 176 countries and over 10 million listeners, an opportunity to become an intern at PWTRN for 3 months with the audience you have already acquired when you presented your 3 weeks of podcasts. And if you're really gung-ho for it, then the opportunity to sign up as a podcast host with Passionate World Talk Radio Network. And you also receive a certificate of completion for the course. This course is for middle and high school students, college, university, transfers, and junior colleges, and adults as well, and for beginning, intermediate, and advanced podcasters. Should you have questions, we coach you and also can consult you to advise you of how to make your podcast better. Remember when Clinton said, is do stupid? Well, I can tell you, it's your content, podcasters. Thank you very much for listening and have a great weekend.